After the chaos of the Reign of Terror, France stood at a crossroads. The nation was in dire need of leadership. No one would have guessed that a short man, born on the tiny island of Corsica, would be crowned Emperor of the French Empire. But by the end of his reign, Napoleon Bonaparte would be considered the most powerful man since Caesar himself.
In the time between 1795 and 1799, we see this young Corsican rising above all expectations. It really begins at the 13th Bain-Marie, where in a few fateful moments he's put in charge of a cannon and it basically single-handedly puts down a royalist rebellion. Keep in mind, he's not even 30 yet.
People see the kid's got talent, but more importantly, more threateningly, he's got ambition. So they send him to Italy, shoving him away from the public eye, but what does he do there but bring the warring nations to peace with the Treaty of Campo?
After the Egyptian campaign, Napoleon returned to Paris to widespread acclaim from the public. However, despite his personal popularity, the government remained ineffective. Change was coming, and Napoleon would place himself at the forefront of it. Napoleon was back in Paris, welcomed as a hero by the public. However, the bulk of the French people saw the current government under the Directory with frustration, hatred, and at the very least, indifference.
Napoleon saw his chance and he took it. The failures of the Directory had given him this golden window to reach out and grasp power. Napoleon himself said in writing that there was no chance of the Directory regaining the respect of the public.
Napoleon teams up with two members of the Directory, Sieyès and Ducos, and they start plotting to overthrow the other directors. Little do Sieyès and Ducos know, though, that Napoleon and his brother Lucien are planning another coup of their own.
What I have done up to now is nothing. I am only at the beginning of the course I must run.
On the morning of 18 Brumaire, historic events began to unfold.
Following Napoleon's rise of popularity in the public eye, he gets this idea. He gets his brother Lucien to march into the councils and basically tells them to get out, to move. Absolute madman. He tells them there's a Jacobin rebellion approaching and that the councils have to move to the countryside. This is a lie, of course. There's no Jacobin rebellion.
After they get to the countryside and everyone puts the puzzle together, 3 of the directors resign, and they're able to force the last 2 to do the same. The next day, the councils have figured out what's going down, and when Napoleon walks into their chambers, they are absolutely furious.
They start shoving him, they start pushing him around, they're accusing him of treachery against France. Some accounts say he fainted. His brother Lucien, who's in the council, he tells the guards inside the council to defend him, and they escort Napoleon outside of the chambers. According to some, he barely makes it out alive. The council is in uproar. During the commotion, Lucien slips out. He tells them it's a madhouse in there, and he points to his brother as proof. He's pale, dejected, and injured. He tells them to get in there to defend their leader, their nation, and they do it. The military comes into the council, and that's effectively the end of the Directory.
Napoleon's perspective on these events, as given in his own account of the coup, was slightly different than the view of the government he overthrew.
Frenchmen, you will doubtless recognize in this conduct the zeal of a soldier of liberty, a citizen devoted to the Republic. Conservative, tutelary, and liberal ideas have been restored to their rights through the dispersal of the rebels who oppressed the councils. Vive la France!
Once the coup is complete, the consulate becomes the next form of government. The consulate consisted of Napoleon Bonaparte, Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, and Pierre Roger Ducos. But Napoleon held all the real power. The other two were only figureheads.
Napoleon sends out his Constitution of the year 8 in 1800, which establishes this government. Napoleon's constitution was submitted to popular vote for ratification or rejection. Due to the widespread disgust with the Directory, the grave foreign danger threatening France, and the faith people had in their military hero, it was ratified by an overwhelming majority. Article 42 of the Constitution established Napoleon as First Consul, which gave him many powers, with no checks or balances. Then, Sieyès and Ducos resigned.
Ignoring his own dictatorial tendencies, Napoleon declared himself as the son of the revolution and claimed to champion the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. However, in actuality, Napoleon as ruler tended to ignore the idea of liberty, maintained equality by rigidly abolishing any social order, and interpreted fraternity as a nationalist ideal. Despite its supposedly democratic nature, Napoleon's government in fact exercised a tyranny more complete than that of the earlier kings.
Napoleon would make lots of reforms as first consul, including the Concordat of 1801, which was a settlement with Pope Pius VII, to reestablish the Catholic Church in France. This had requirements such as the clergy must swear an oath of loyalty to the state. Later, in 1804, Napoleon established the Civil Code, also called the Napoleonic Code, which abolished birth privileges, set up advancement based solely on performance, protected property, forbid unions, and took away rights from women. Under Napoleon's rule, there was also an increase in economic stability and educational reforms, all of which set the foundation for modern France.
Emperor in the presence of Pope Pius VII, with overwhelming popular support. It abolishes the consulate once and for all. The famous general and first consul is now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French.
Napoleon made it seem like he was becoming emperor purely for the good of the people, and not out of any self-interest, as he explained in his reasons for making himself emperor. Napoleon stated that the necessity of hereditary power in a state as vast as France had long been perceived by the first consul. He had endeavored in vain to avoid this conclusion, but the public solicitude and the hopes of our enemies emphasized the importance of his task, and he realized that his death might ruin his whole work. Under such circumstances, and with such a pressure of public opinion, there was no alternative left to the first consul. He resolved, therefore, to accept for himself, and two of his brothers after him, the burden imposed by the exigencies of the situation.
Once he was coronated, Napoleon would rule as emperor for 11 years, until 1815, when his imperial rule would come to an end.